90%. Hold that number. In the second half of the 18th century, roughly 90% of the coffee consumed in Europe came from one island in the Caribbean. The island was called Saint-Domingue. The people who grew that coffee were not paid. They were not compensated in any form. They were owned. And the civilization that called itself enlightened, that built coffeehouses where men discussed liberty and the rights of man, drank their morning cup from a system of brutality so extreme that the life expectancy of a newly arrived enslaved African on that island was 7 years. Not 7 years of labor, 7 years of life. But here's the part nobody tells you. The companies selling you coffee today know this history in detail. And they built their entire business model around making sure you never think about it while you drink. Stay with me until the end, because the number I'm going to give you in the final minutes of this video will genuinely change how you look at every cup you've ever ordered. France knew about the 7 years, Britain knew. The Amsterdam merchants who financed the ships knew. The philosophers who ordered a second cup knew. The knowledge did not stop anyone. The coffee was too profitable, the demand too insatiable, and the people producing it too thoroughly stripped of legal standing to register as a problem worth solving. What follows is not a story of ignorance corrected by progress. It is a story of deliberate choice, sustained over centuries, dressed in the language of taste and refinement. Start somewhere older. Start where the plant itself began. The highlands of Ethiopia, specifically the region called Kaffa, contain wild coffee trees that have been growing without human cultivation for longer than anyone can accurately date. The Oromo people of that region knew the plant long before anyone attempted to brew it. They crushed the ripe cherries together with animal fat, rolled the mixture into small balls, and carried them on long journeys as a concentrated energy source. The caffeine was the point. The ceremony came later. The colonialism came later still. The first reliable documentation of coffee as a brewed drink comes from Yemen in the 15th century. Sufi monks in Mocha used it to stay alert during nighttime prayers. The beverage moved quickly from monasteries into the general population. By 1510, coffee houses had opened in Cairo and Mecca. By the mid-16th century, Istanbul had hundreds of them. Ottoman authorities tried to close them at least 3 separate times. They never managed it. When coffee reached Europe, it arrived as a functional tool, and traders understood its commercial potential immediately. The Venetians were importing it commercially by 1600. The first English coffee house opened in Oxford in 1650. Within 40 years, London alone had more than 2,000 of them. Lloyd's of London began as a coffee house. The London Stock Exchange began as a coffee house. The habit of tipping servers began in a coffee house, where customers would drop coins into a box labeled "to ensure promptness." The demand that grew from these establishments was extraordinary. European consumption expanded so rapidly that Yemeni supply could not meet it. Arab traders had long understood the value of their monopoly. They boiled or roasted all exported coffee beans before sale to prevent germination. Any plant grown outside Yemen would have to come from a smuggled, living seed. The Dutch broke the monopoly first. A trader named Peter van den Broeke removed live coffee plants from Mocha around 1616. By 1699, Dutch colonists had established plantations in Java. By 1714, a cultivated plant was given as a diplomatic gift to Louis XIV of France. A cutting from that Paris plant was transported across the Atlantic in 1720 by a French naval officer named Gabriel de Clieu. He described sharing his personal water ration with the plant during a shortage at sea, shielding it physically when a passenger tried to destroy it, and surviving a pirate attack before delivering the seedling to Martinique. From that single plant, or a small number of contemporaneous transplantations, essentially all coffee cultivation in the Americas descended. The botanical diversity of the Ethiopian highlands was compressed. through colonial transplantation and commercial monoculture, into a fragility that still haunts the crop today. Saint-Domingue occupies the western third of Hispaniola. France claimed it in 1697, and what followed was one of the most intensive programs of extractive agriculture in history. The colony was roughly the size of Maryland. By the 1780s, it was generating more wealth than all of Spanish America combined. It produced approximately 40% of Europe's sugar and more than half of its coffee. The infrastructure of several French cities was essentially built on Saint-Domingue exports. The workforce was enslaved Africans trafficked primarily from the Kingdom of Dahomey. By 1789, there were approximately 500,000 enslaved people in Saint-Domingue. The French-born colonial population was around 40,000. Mortality was not a side effect of the system. It was a feature of it. Many planters calculated explicitly that it was more economical to work enslaved people to death and purchase replacements than to maintain them through their working years. Archival plantation records from Saint-Domingue show regular accounting entries for replacement of deceased workforce, sitting alongside entries for fertilizer and tools. The people appear in the same columns as the machinery. The colony was entirely dependent on continuous trafficking from Africa to maintain its workforce. The insurance companies of London and Paris insured the ships. The banks of Amsterdam and Hamburg financed the voyages. The customers who bought the coffee at the docks of Le Havre sustained the demand that made all of it necessary. Europe's relationship to this knowledge was a sustained act of selective attention. Voltaire wrote in coffeehouses. Rousseau outlined the social contract in coffeehouses. The men who invented the modern concept of universal human rights drank their coffee in establishments supplied by a commodity grown by people who had no rights at all. Some of them knew this and said so. The Abbé Raynal published a history of European colonialism in 1770 that described the slave trade with forensic brutality and predicted that the enslaved people of the Caribbean would eventually revolt. His book was banned, burned, and enormously popular in underground circulation. But the abolitionists were a minority, systematically outspent and outvoted by the commercial interests that depended on the system continuing. On the night of August 22, 1791, at a ceremony in the forest of Bois Caïman, conducted by the Vodou leader Duddy Boukman, the revolution began. Within days, the northern plain of Saint-Domingue was on fire. The coffee plantations and sugar estates that had generated France's wealth were burning, and the people who had been owned in those places were burning them. What followed was 13 years of war. France, Britain, and Spain all sent armies. The formerly enslaved fighters, organized under Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe, defeated all of them. Dessalines declared the Independent Republic of Haiti on January 1, 1804. It was the first and, for a long time, the only successful revolution led by enslaved people in world history. Europe's response was instructive. France did not recognize Haitian independence until 1825, and extracted a condition so extraordinary it deserves to be stated plainly. In exchange for recognition, Haiti agreed to pay France 90 million francs in reparations. Not France paying Haiti for 2 centuries of stolen labor and murder. Haiti paying France for the loss of the property that had been enslaved. The debt was not fully paid off until 1947. Haiti was paying this debt for 122 years. Here is where the false resolution enters the story. The abolition of slavery across the 19th century is often told as the moment the moral contradiction was finally resolved. The coffee houses had eventually produced the argument that ended what they had sustained. Progress occurred. The problem with this story is the geography. Brazilian coffee cultivation expanded enormously through the 19th century and continued to use enslaved labor until 1888, the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery. After Brazilian abolition, formerly enslaved workers were replaced by European immigrants bound by debt peonage arrangements that bore a marked structural resemblance to the system they replaced. In East Africa, Central Africa, and Southeast Asia, colonial powers created new plantation systems in new geographies. African farmers who had grown food crops for their own subsistence were required by colonial law to devote portions of their land and labor to export crops, including coffee. Failure to comply was punishable by imprisonment, forced labor, or confiscation of land. The labor was not formally called slavery. It was called taxation in kind, compulsory cultivation, or contract labor. By the early 20th century, the global coffee market had stabilized into a structure that persists today. Cultivation happens in countries between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Consumption happens overwhelmingly in wealthy countries in North America and Europe. The price paid at origin is determined largely by commodity markets in New York and London, where traders who have never set foot on a coffee farm speculate on futures contracts. Now, here is the number I promised you. In 2002, the International Coffee Organization published data showing that coffee-growing countries received approximately 10% of the total retail value of their crop. The remaining 90% was captured at the processing, roasting, branding, and retail stages, almost all of which occur in wealthy importing countries. Ethiopia, the country where coffee originated, where the wild genetic diversity of Coffea arabica still exists in highland forests, earns approximately 10 cents on every dollar of coffee it produces. Starbucks, with more than 38,000 locations globally as of 2024, generates revenue that exceeds the entire gross domestic product of Ethiopia. The country that gave the world the coffee plant operates, in the global commodity system, as a low-cost input supplier for corporations headquartered on the other side of the planet. The person who picks coffee cherries is, in most parts of the world, seasonal labor paid per kilogram of cherries harvested. A skilled picker in Guatemala earns somewhere between $5 and $9 per day during harvest. The cherries they pick in a day will, after processing, roasting, shipping, and retail markup, sell at a specialty cafe for several $100s. The worker who picked them will never know this. The quality in the cup is, in the most literal sense, the work of the picker's hands and eyes. Coffee cherries picked underripe or overripe produce inferior flavor at every subsequent stage, no matter how skilled the roaster. The picker is the first and most consequential link in the quality chain. The picker is also, in the global distribution of coffee's value, the person compensated least. The Fair Trade Certification System guarantees a minimum price of $1.40 per pound for conventional Arabica, plus a community development premium. The system has genuinely improved incomes for certified cooperatives. It has also, according to research published by economists at the School of Oriental and African Studies in 2014, in some cases, produced lower wages for hired workers on certified farms than on non-certified farms, because the premium revenue accrued to cooperative members who are also farm owners, not to the laborers picking the cherries. The certification audits the price paid to the cooperative. It does not consistently audit what the cooperative pays the people doing the physical work. The specialty coffee industry has developed considerable vocabulary for acknowledging all of this. Direct trade relationships, where roasters purchase directly from farming cooperatives and publish the prices they paid, have become a mark of ethical credibility. Individual roasters build personal relationships with specific farms and tell those stories on their packaging. A bag of coffee from a Brooklyn roaster might include the farmer's name, the altitude, the processing method, and tasting notes describing the flavor as bright cherry, cardamom, and dark chocolate. It sells for $22 per 12 ounces. Whether this represents a meaningful structural shift or a more sophisticated marketing apparatus built on top of the same underlying extraction is a question the industry has not definitively answered. The wild coffee trees in the forests of Kaffa are still there. Scientists studying climate change regard those forests as irreplaceable. If Coffea arabica loses its resistance to the fungal diseases and temperature stress that climate change is accelerating, the forests of southwestern Ethiopia contain the genetic material that could save it. Whether those forests survive the next 50 years depends on whether Ethiopian farmers living near them have enough economic incentive to protect rather than clear them, which depends on whether the global coffee market pays them enough to make forest conservation a viable choice. And here is where historians and economists of commodity supply chains have not reached agreement. And the question is worth leaving genuinely open: whether the problem embedded in the global coffee trade is a problem of information, solvable by transparency and certification and better market design, or whether it is a problem of structure, a predictable outcome of any system in which wealthy countries set the prices for goods produced by poor ones. The fair trade movement was built on the first theory. The scholars who study it most closely tend to move toward the second. They have not agreed on what the second theory would require in practice, or whether consumers choosing carefully in a Frankfurt cafe can reach it at all.